Sparks that I don't remember. Hold and let it shine. Fixing stars to fade away. Fixing stars to fade away. Fixing stars to fade away.
Hello, dear friends of Kabbalah International. We are once again with Mario Saban.
Thank you, Nacho. A pleasure. Shalom.
My pleasure, Mario. Shalom. In previous chapters, we discussed the history of Kabbalah. In this chapter, we will delve into the period starting from 1492, with the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and how the process of dissemination of Jewish mysticism unfolded in other places. Additionally, we will explore the impact of key figures and fundamental texts that emerged during this era, profoundly influencing subsequent Jewish mystical thought.
Look, the subject is the following. There are several lines. Some Kabbalists went to Morocco. There are going to be great Kabbalists throughout history. Other Kabbalists went to Istanbul, to Thessaloniki, for example. Meir ibn Gabay writes the work Buddha Takodesh, the sacred work, Kabbalah, based on Al-Castini, who is another Kabbalist, also called El-Castil in Valencia. From Toledo, David ibn Zimbra will appear in Egypt, who will be the master of Isaac Luria. Then, slowly at first, and then very quickly at the beginning of the 16th century, they will concentrate in what will be called the Kabbalists of Safed in Galilee, in Israel. In Hebrew, it is called Tzfat, the city of Safed. What happens here? There, for example, is Alcabez, who comes from Thessaloniki and is going to be the creator of Lechadodi, one of the mystical works, a mystical song, a mystical poem that appears in all the Shabbat services on Friday night. Personalities will begin to concentrate around 1540, 1550, like Moshe Cordovero, who is one of the great Kabbalists of Saft, the one who is going to continue with Abulafia's meditations. With greater understanding, for example, his work, the Pardes Rimonim, The Garden of Pomegranates, is a work of more than 1,200 pages analyzing the tree of life on an ecstatic level, as Abulafia did. In other words, Cordovero could be called a Kabbalist of the Abulafian line, even though he knows Maseh Merkava, but he specializes in the tree of life. So today he could be a transpersonal psychologist. With the tree of life today, so we owe to him a very big development of the Kabbalah with a lot of works. The Oriyakar, which would be the beautiful light, this work has 18 volumes. And it's fundamental today in the study of Kabbalah. He became the great Kabbalist of Safed. It seemed that it was going to be Chaim Vital, but Isaac Luria appeared in 1569 and took over after the death of Cordovero. The Lurianic Kabbalah provide an incredible analysis of how not only the universe was born, but also how it was structured through all the divine faces. The divine faces in Hebrew are called partsufim, which are mechanisms of self-contraction, but of self-contraction where the feminine and masculine forces are explained in each one of the stages. The Lurianic Kabbalah is very complex, not many people can understand it. And after Isaac Luria's death in 1571, Chaim Vital will appear, who will be a specialist in reincarnation. Therefore, in that same period, three of the greatest Kabbalists of all time are known, I would say, in the 16th century. Cordovero, with the Pardes Rimonim and the Oryakar, analyzing the tree of life on a psychological level, then Luria, with the creation of the universe, and Chaim Vital, analyzing past life regression and everything related to reincarnation. He writes the work Sha'ar HaGilgulim, which means the gates of reincarnation, where he explains how the soul rotates, the nature of the soul, where it comes from, the Olam Abba. all the mechanisms that the soul has between this physical body and the out of the field of matter. From here, they are going to have a lot of disciples. These disciples are going to continue expanding the Kabbalah with greater force until a moment comes when the Kabbalah will enter into crisis. With the Messianic movement of Sabtai Tzvi, because Nathan of Gaza, who is a Kabbalist, who will be the author of Sefer Abraya, the Book of Creation, he is going to unite with a young Jew who comes from Smyrna, who for many could have some kind of Asperger's or bipolar issue or some kind of psychological issue that we don't know about. The point is that he declares himself a Messiah. Nathan of Gaza sees him as the Messiah, so it is Nathan of Gaza that almost declares him, endorses him as the Messiah, and the whole Kabbalah is used for the justification of his messianic revelation. And therefore, that is why I say that this is where Kabbalah suffers a great blow, because the rabbis worldwide will make the decision to keep Kabbalah secret. This is due to the consequences of the ideas that the Kabbalists have, which could give rise to ideas that might create schismatic movements within Judaism, like the one that had happened with Sabtai Tzvi. The end of the story of Sabtai Tzvi is well known. The Sultan calls him and tells him that either he converts or he kills him.
About what year is this?
We are putting ourselves in 1680, approximately late 17th century. He converts to Islam, he does not want to die, he does not want to be executed, and his disciples, his followers, remain between Judaism and Islam. They remain halfway and still exist today. They are the Sabbateans. There are about 10,000 of them all over the world, between Turkey and Greece. They are called the Domni at the present time. In fact, I met one in Smyrna, a Domni, that is a man who believes that Sabtai Tzvi is the Messiah. But this movement discredited the study of Kabbalah significantly. Studying Kabbalah meant that one could come to think in very different or radical and daring ways, which could lead to the rise of a messianic movement that was somewhat uncontrollable. And for that reason, the Kabbalah went into a kind of lethargy, at least in the Sephardic world. At that time, some of these teachings were transferred to Italy.
Like a quarantine.
Yes, but it's a quarantine that lasted, I would say, very little, because notice that around 1720 and a little more, 1727, beginning of the 18th century, 50 years after all this Sabtai Tzvi movement, for example, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto is going to appear, with Luzzatto's Kabbalah, which is the Lurianic Kabbalah. It means that in quarantine, in quotation marks, because the Kabbalah continued to have strength. What happened is that Luzzatto, when studying Kabbalah, was associated with the Sabbatean movement and accused in the Jewish communities of being a Sabbatean. You could have problems. So Luzzatto had a lot of difficulty writing in terms of Kabbalah. In fact, the Rebbe of Venice wanted to excommunicate him, and he went from Venice to Amsterdam, and again he suffered persecution there because the Kabbalah became suspicious of such radical contents that it could make a person leave the religious fold. But where Kabbalah became popular in a spectacular way, and also in the 18th century in the same period, is with Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, who was born in 1698 and died in 1760. So Baal Shem Tov is contemporary to Luzzatto. Luzzatto wrote many of the works that Baal Shem Tov is going to study in Ukraine, and he is going to create the Hasidic movement, which is to popularize the Kabbalah for the people, that the people can access the Kabbalah in a simple way. At the beginning they were very afraid of him, because they feared he might be another Sabbatai Zevi. That's why the Gaon of Vilna in Lithuania excommunicated him and his entire movement. Few people know about the excommunication of the entire Hasidic movement by the Vilnius Gaon. However, Hasidism continued its growth, dividing along different lines, and today it is a very large worldwide movement, with more than 13 or 14 different lines, where through the Tanya, which is a work of the 1794, it's popularized. There are some branches of the Baal Shem Tov, which is, for example, the branch of one of his descendants, which is Nachman of Breslev, who manages to create a type of Kabbalah based on Emunah, based on trust. So there we have a type of Kabbalah, but all the Kabbalah that somehow spread from Hasidism was by this movement, by the Baal Shem Tov and his descendants. But, however, it did not allow the fundamental and most important sources to be studied. It was through the books of Hasidism that Kabbalah was studied, so to speak. It was a little bit filtered, we could call it, in a way. And notice that from the Hasidic movement will appear Baruch Hashlag.
Yes.
That is to say, the son of the Val Asulan will appear the Val Asulan, then Baruch Hashlag. From there, from that movement, Michael Lightman will appear as a modern Kabbalist. From that movement will appear Berg, as a student of the Val Asulan also. So, all the Hasidism will end up in the two great movements of Lightman and Berg today. My Kabbalah studies have a small difference. For me, it's very small, because instead of studying directly Hashlag, I have left. I've left the Hasidism a little bit aside, although I've studied the Tanya for 3 years. It seems to me that the Kabbalah developed by the Hasidic movement is very important, but my claim was to go back to the sources. And that is why I, for example, study directly from Cordovero, directly from Vital's writings on Isa Gloria, or from Vital's writings directly, or from Abulafia's writings directly, to really see in the originals, without having gone through the 18th century, what kind of fundamental ideas there are in their origin. It's like a return, we could call it, to the medieval Sephardic Kabbalah, which does not have great differences with that of Hasidism. What happens is that, for example, Hasidism has the idea of the tzaddik, the idea of the nepotistic tzaddik, in the sense that he is the son of the head of the group. In this sense, this figure of the tzaddik is given certain semi-messianic functions, almost of intermediation with the divinity. And I believe that here we are going a little bit out of the line of tradition, where the relationship was always direct with the divinity, and not through a tzaddik. Therefore, the tzaddik as the head of the movement, or of various movements within the Hasidut, because there is not just one, the Gurs movement, the Bobovs movement, Chabad, Breslev. There are many movements. The Hasidism, in some way, marks a type of intermediation. And it's a cultural product of the 18th century, so its themes are from the 18th century and not from the Middle Ages. Therefore, my approach has been to focus on medieval Kabbalah and to delve deeper into its sources. Currently, I would say that within Kabbalah there are movements like Berg's, Lightman's, and a very large number of Kabbalists in the Spanish-speaking world. We have Eduardo Madirolas, who rescues again all the meditations of Abulafia.
Yes, it is.
We have Mario Saban, who is also a great Kabbalist, who has united Kabbalah with literature. All that line of mixture, of synthesis, and of entering Kabbalistic themes in literature, which had already been done with Borges. And that, in my opinion, Mario Saban continues.
By the way, both are professors of the School of Kabbalah.
Yes, both are professors of the School of Kabbalah, and they have contributed a lot to the diffusion of Kabbalah, both in the area of literature and poetry, as is the case of Mario Saban, as well as in the area of systems and all of meditation, which is the position of Madirolas. So what we are seeing today is a worldwide explosion on a spiritual level of Kabbalah terms, because again I reiterate, there is a tremendous amount of information, a tremendous amount of tradition, and it is a tradition that undoubtedly is having a very strong impact on the souls of those who today suffer from existential emptiness. Endorsed, I would tell you, by hundreds and hundreds of sages, of the people of Israel throughout history. It has the endorsement of many people who went through these experiences of imbalance and existential emptiness and who were able to get out of it. And they came out, I would say, with honors. Therefore, the spiritual potency that the Kabbalah has today is the product of so many centuries of accumulation, of teachings and experiences.
Thank you, Mario.
Shalom, Nacho, thank you.